Hello Braille class, today we're going to be reading the next part of Charlie and the Great Glass Elevator. Remember in the last part, the grandparents had taken the Wonkavite and poor Grandma Georgina had gone into minuses. She was actually -2, so she disappeared. Did Goldie live or did she go? The doctors gathered round her bed. There's really not much hope, they said. She's going, gone, they cried. She's had her chips, she's dead, she's dead. I'm not so sure, the child replied, and all at once she opened wide, her great big bluish eyes, and sighed, and gave the anxious doctor a wink, and said, I'll be okay, I think. So Goldie lived, and back she went, at first to Granny's place in Kent. Her father came in the second day, and fetched her in a Chevrolet, and drove her to their home in Dover. But Goldie's troubles were not over. You see, if someone takes enough of any highly dangerous stuff, one will invariably find some traces of it left behind. It pained us greatly to relate that Goldie suffered from this fate. She'd taken such a massive fill of this unpleasant kind of pill. It got into her blood and bones. It messed up all her chromosomes. It made her constantly upset, and she could never really get the beastly stuff to go away. And so the girl was forced to stay for 7 hours every day within the everlasting gloom of what we call the ladies' room. And after all, the WC is not the gayest place to be. So now, before it is too late, take head of Goldie's dreadful fate. And seriously, all jokes apart, do promise us across your heart that you will never help yourself to medicine from the medicine shelf. Chapter 16, Vita Wonk and Minus Land. It's up to you, Charlie, my boy, said Mr. Wonka. It's your factory. Shall we let your Grandma Georgina wait it out for the next 2 years, or shall we try to bring her back right now? You don't really mean you might be able to bring her back, cried Charlie. There's no harm in trying, is there, if that's the way you want it? Oh, yes, of course I do, for Mother's sake especially. Can't you see how sad she is? Mrs. Bucket was sitting on the edge of the big bed, dabbing her eyes with a hanky. My poor old mum, she kept saying, she's -2, and I won't see her again for months and months and months, if ever at all. Behind her, Grandpa Joe, with the help of an Oompa Loompa, was feeding his 3-month-old wife, Grandma Josephine, from a bottle. Alongside them, Mr. Bucket was spooning something called Wonka Squidge Mallow baby food into 1-year-old Grandpa George's mouth, but mostly all over his chin and chest. Big deal, he was muttering angrily. What a lousy, rotten this is. They tell me I'm going to the chocolate factory to have a good time, and I finish up being a mother to my father-in-law. Everything's under control, Charlie, said Mr. Wonka, surveying the scene. They're doing fine. They don't need us here. Come along, we're off to hunt for Grandma. He caught Charlie by the arm and went dancing towards the open door of the great glass elevator. Hurry up, my dear boy, hurry up, he cried. We've got to hustle if we're going to get there before... Before what, Mr. Wonka? Before she gets subtracted, of course. All minuses are subtracted. Don't you know any arithmetic at all? They were in the elevator now, and Mr. Wonka was searching among the hundreds of buttons for the one he wanted. Here we are, he said, placing his finger delicately upon a tiny ivory button on which it said, Minus Land. The door slid shut, and then, with a fearful whistling, whirring sound, the great machine leaped away to the right. Charlie grabbed Mr. Wonka's leg and howled on for dear life. Mr. Wonka pulled a jump seat out of the wall and said, Sit down, Charlie, quick, and strap yourself in tight. This journey is going to be rough and choppy. There were straps on either side of the seat, and Charlie buckled himself firmly in. Mr. Wonka pulled out a second seat for himself and did the same. We're going a long way down, he said. Oh, such a long way down we are going. The elevator was gathering speed. It twisted and swerved. It swung sharply to the left. Then it went right, then left again. And it was heading downward all the time. Down and down and down. I only hope, said Mr. Wonka, the Oompa Loompas aren't using the other elevator today. What other elevator? Asked Charlie. The one that goes the opposite way on the same track as this. Holy snakes, Mr. Wonka. You mean we might have a collision? I've always been lucky so far, my boy. Hey, take a look out there. Quick. Through the window, Charlie caught a glimpse of what seemed like an enormous quarry with a steep, craggy brown rock face, and all over the rock face there were hundreds of Oompa Loompas working with picks and pneumatic drills. Rock candy, said Mr. Wonka. That's the richest deposit of rock candy in the world. The elevator sped on. We're going deeper, Charlie, deeper and deeper. We're about 200,000 feet down already. Strange sights were flashing by outside, but the elevator was travelling at such a terrific speed that only occasionally Charlie was able to recognise anything at all. Once, he thought he saw in the distance a cluster of tiny houses shaped like upside-down cups, and there were streets in between the houses and Oompa Loompas walking in the streets. Another time, as they were passing some sort of a vast red plain dotted with things that looked like oil derricks, he saw high into the air. "A gusher!" cried Mr. Wonka, clapping his hands. "A whacking great gusher! How splendid! Just when we needed it." And you can see in the picture the rock candy face wall and the Oompa Loompas with their pickaxes. "A what?" said Charlie. "We've struck chocolate again, my boy. That'll be a rich new field. Oh, what a beautiful gusher. Just look at it go." On they roared, heading downward more steeply than ever now, and hundreds, literally hundreds of astonishing sights kept flashing by outside. There were giant cogwheels turning and mixers mixing and bubbles bubbling and vast orchids of toffee apple trees and lakes the size of football grounds filled with blue and gold and green liquid, and everywhere there were Oompa Loompas. "You realise," said Mr. Wonka, "that what you saw earlier on when you went round the factory with all those naughty little children was only a tiny corner of the establishment. It goes down for miles and miles, and as soon as possible I shall show you all the way around slowly and properly. But that will take 3 weeks. 3 weeks to go all around the chocolate factory. Wow, that's a very long time. Right now we have other things to think about, and I have important things to tell you. Listen carefully to me, Charlie. I must talk fast, for we'll be there in a couple of minutes. I suppose you guessed," Mr. Wonka went on, "what happened to all those Oompa Loompas in the testing room when I was experimenting with Wonkavite. Of course you did. They disappeared and became minuses, just like your Grandma Georgina. The recipe was miles too strong. One of them actually became minus 87. Imagine that." "You mean he's got to wait 87 years before he can come back?" Charlie asked. "That's what kept bugging me, my boy. After all, one can't allow one's best friends to wait around as miserable minuses for 87 years. "And get subtracted as well," said Charlie. "That would be frightful." "Of course it would, Charlie. So what did I do? Willy Wonka," I said to myself, "if you can invent Wonkavite to make people younger than you, surely to goodness you can also invent something else to make people older." "Aha," cried Charlie. "I see what you're getting at. Then you could turn the minuses quickly back into pluses and bring them home again." "Precisely, my dear boy, precisely. Always supposing, of course, that I could find out where the minuses had gone to." The elevator plunged on, diving steeply towards the centre of the earth. All was blackness outside now. There was nothing to be seen. We're going to have a little read of some more tomorrow.